Hello and welcome back to World 360. What does Russia gain from writing off 23 billion US dollars in debt from African countries? Is yet another African country becoming grounds for a proxy war between Russia and the West? And how is cash-strapped Pakistan attempting to lure investors from the Arab world? We answer this and more in today's episode. So first up, Russia. Last week, President Vladimir Putin hosted heads of African countries in St. Petersburg for the 2023 Russia-Africa Summit. This is the second such edition of the summit, and the theme this year was for peace, security and development. However, the summit was criticized for not resulting in any grain deal or path to peace in Ukraine. If you recall, 7 African leaders visited Ukraine and Russia in June to try and suggest a path for peace. And perhaps this summit in St. Petersburg was an opportunity to lay out some plans, though that did not materialize. However, there was one important announcement that came out of the Russia-Africa Summit, which was that Russia decided to forgive approximately 23 billion US dollars of debt owed by African countries. The total amount of debt of the African countries written off by Russia amounts to 23 billion US dollars, with another 90 million US dollars to be allocated for the same purposes, Putin had stated. He also said countries facing acute food crises like Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, the Central African Republic and Eritrea would be provided with free grain. So what do these acts of goodwill mean in terms of Russia's foreign policy? For one, Russia is quite isolated on the world stage both economically and geopolitically. Therefore, gaining as many friends as it can, especially those that can serve as easy votes at the United Nations or the UN, would be helpful. Now, African countries, especially those rich in resources such as gold and materials used for nuclear power plants like uranium, are important for Russia ever since the war in Ukraine. Secondly, there seems to be a defeatist understanding or idea in Moscow, at least among experts, that certain African countries were never going to be able to pay back their debts. So why not use a debt waiver to gain some goodwill? Russian political scientist Dmitry Evstaviev told Sputnik that due to political instability in certain African states and external financial aid cargo cults, it seemed unlikely that African countries were ever going to repay the debt. The way in which Russia is trying to woo African states is also interesting, given Moscow is trying to position itself as an alternative to Western colonialism, which many African states have endured throughout their histories. It's no surprise that Putin used food security as a bat to beat the West with, arguing that it is the West that has obstructed the supply of Russian grain and fertilizers, which has then had ripples on developing countries across the world, including Africa. But one must ask, was this summit a success? Well, since there weren't any substantial deliverables or agreements, and that too the fact that only 17 African heads of state attended compared to 43 that had attended in the 2019 summit, it's safe to say the summit was nothing more than a charm offensive. For our second topic, we're looking at Niger, an African country and former French colony which did not participate in the recent Russia-Africa summit, not out of any geopolitical reasons, but rather severe instability that has erupted domestically. Niger, located in West Africa, has been thrown into chaos by a military coup and the ouster of its elected president, Mohamed Bazoum. This is yet another country within the Sahel region in Africa, which has faced a coup, political instability, or a security crisis of some form. We already know the story in Sudan, where civil war is on the verge of breaking out. Since we were just talking about Russia, perhaps it is incumbent on me to mention that during the recent Russia-Africa summit, the head of the Wagner group, the renegade warlord, lauded the military coup in Niger. Now, that itself should tell you that once again, an African country appears to be emerging as a proxy conflict between Russia and the West. In fact, Niger has served as a key ally of Western countries like France and the US against Islamist insurgencies in the Sahel region. Niger is also home to several foreign forces from France, the US, Italy, and the European Union. Some argue that it was the war in Libya in 2011 which saw the fall of Muammar Gaddafi that triggered an inflow of small arms, mercenaries, and armed groups into the Sahel region. This is why, despite the presence of foreign forces in Niger, terror groups like Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and others still operate in the country. The shadowy Wagner group also has a presence in Niger, and as mentioned before, it's clear how they view the recent coup. For our last topic, we're looking at cash-strapped Pakistan, which is attempting to lure investors from the Arab world, primarily Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain. Now, we know that top Chinese officials have been flocking to Pakistan in recent weeks to help the country tackle its economic crisis. In fact, Vice Premier He Lifeng visited Pakistan earlier this week. However, we need to look at how Pakistan's traditional lenders, the Gulf countries, have been coming to its aid. As you know, the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, approved a $3 billion bailout package for Pakistan just last month, which provided much needed relief for a country facing high inflation and a deteriorating currency, as well as drying up foreign reserves. But this bailout package has only served as a temporary relief, as major macroeconomic and structural deficiencies in the Pakistani economy remain. The country needs to pivot towards export-led growth. In fact, this has been suggested by many experts in Pakistan. But for that, political will is also required. For now, the Shehbaz Sharif-led government in Pakistan seems to be refocusing on foreign investments. On Monday, Pakistan, in principle, approved 28 projects worth billions of dollars that would be offered to Gulf countries for investment. The goal is that such projects will help Pakistan reduce its dependence on loans and imports and also provide much-needed jobs. These 28 projects span various sectors like infrastructure, clean energy, tourism, and manufacturing. One of these includes constructing a deep-sea port in Gwadar, a coastal city in Balochistan, which could streamline trade with Gulf countries. Let's not forget that in a major move, Pakistan last month allowed foreign investors to remit the entire profit abroad in their own country's currency, which was announced in a bid to provide extra protection to these foreign investors. But it remains to see whether this focus on foreign direct investment will work. As it is, Pakistan's FDI plunged 44% during the first 7 months of the financial year of 2023. Thank you so much for watching. This is Pia Krishnankutty for ThePrint.